Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an incredible story like this. One asterisk, it was supposed to be a joke, a challenge I couldn't ignore. My husband, the arrogant CEO of a successful tech firm, had laughed as he handed me a glass of wine in our penthouse one night. "I bet you wouldn't last a week without me," he said, his voice laced with smug superiority. Without hesitating, I placed the glass on the marble counter, the chill from the wine slipping down my hand. I'd been waiting for a moment like this, but he had no idea. His words weren't a challenge, they were a sentence. And he wouldn't even see it coming. The next morning, I didn't make the coffee he always asked for. I didn't wait for him to kiss me goodbye before rushing off to his meetings. Instead, I walked out of our penthouse, leaving only a single set of keys behind. His house, his car, his life, his whole world was about to unravel, and I would be the one to unravel it. It wasn't dramatic. There were no angry confrontations, no shouting matches. I didn't even need to pack. I'd been preparing for this moment for months. Slowly, I'd been siphoning away things I might need. A spare credit card, a passport I'd hidden in my gym bag, a suitcase I'd stashed in the back of a storage unit. By the time the door closed behind me, I was already miles away. I checked into a boutique hotel under my maiden name. I paid in cash, of course. Everything was already in place. A quiet room with a view of the skyline, but far enough from his world to feel like freedom. It had been years since I'd thought of myself as anyone other than his wife. I'd been carefully curated for his image, polished, quiet, obedient, a perfect accessory for gala dinners and charity events. But I had always been more. Much more. My name wasn't just a title. It wasn't just a label on his arm. It was mine. And he'd forgotten it. He'd forgotten who I was before the diamonds, before the penthouse, before the illusions of a perfect life. I pulled out my phone and watched the footage from our penthouse cameras. I had access to everything. It wasn't hard to get. When you live in a world of secrets, it's easy to find your way in. The sight of him, pacing in the kitchen, calling everyone but me, was almost comical. His eyes scanned the counter where my keys once lay, trying to understand what had happened. He wouldn't find anything. Not yet, but it was coming. And it was going to destroy him. I checked my phone again. 6 missed calls. The first voicemail played automatically. "Come home. We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but with that familiar edge. By the 5th voicemail, there was panic. "You can't just leave. You'll regret this." His voice cracked. He wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to the life he thought he could control. I hit delete. Every single message. 3 hours had passed since I walked away. 3 hours since I left him behind. And in that time, everything I'd planned, everything I'd quietly built, had been set in motion. I ordered room service. A quiet dinner alone, in my suite. I poured myself a glass of wine and waited for the next call to come through. It wasn't long before my phone buzzed again. This time it was his father, the man who had always treated me like a commodity, something to be traded, a trophy his son could show off at his next gala. His words were sharp, demanding, but I let it ring out. My first real test had arrived. I opened the secure drive containing my own investments. A 6-figure portfolio I had built on my own, while my husband believed I was playing with stocks. He had no idea that his little allowance to me had grown into something that could sustain me for years. He'd mocked my trading as a hobby, calling it cute, a distraction. Well, it was time to show him just how much of a distraction it had been. The following days felt surreal. I went to the gym, not to maintain my figure, but to maintain my sanity. Every trade I made, every legal step I took, was moving me closer to my goal. No longer would I be the wife who followed, the woman in the background. I was taking control of my life. The first message from my lawyer came through on a Tuesday morning. Patricia Kim, a no-nonsense attorney from Connecticut, had prepared all the necessary paperwork. Divorce, financial settlements, assets, everything. I was ready. My husband, on the other hand, was not. I waited. 3 weeks had passed since I left. I was living in a hotel, a new identity, a new life. That every day, I reviewed the documents that had been leaked to me by an anonymous source. I had everything. Insider trading, money laundering, evidence that could bring down the entire Whitmore empire. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Ashton's arrogance continued to fuel his mistakes. He thought he could silence me. He thought he could play the same game with me that he played with every woman he ever married. But what he didn't realize was that I was smarter. I'd been watching, learning, documenting. And when the time came, I would strike. My patience was tested again when I found out he was planning a dinner with me. He wanted to discuss logistics. He hadn't even mentioned our anniversary. This was a business meeting masquerading as a personal one. I agreed to meet him, but I didn't plan to leave empty-handed. The restaurant was a familiar one, the place where we'd celebrated many occasions, none of which ever felt like celebrations. I sat across from him, now less of a man and more of a shell of what he used to be. His eyes were tired, his smile forced. He was sweating, his fingers twitching, the weight of his empire bearing down on him. He began speaking, talking about expansion deals, his company's losses, trying to maintain his composure. I stared at him, feeling nothing. All the years of being silenced, of being the perfect wife, had led to this moment. His facade was crumbling, but he didn't know it yet. A sudden shift in the room made me pause. Diana, his new mistress, had joined us. But unlike the others, she wasn't wearing a mask. She was real, unpolished, and in her eyes, I could see something I hadn't expected: fear. Fear of him, of the man who had promised her everything, only to discard her when she was no longer of use. She had no idea I knew what she had done. She had no idea that I had already seen her betrayal, her whispered meetings with him in hotel rooms. It didn't matter now. She was another piece in a game I had already won. The evening stretched on. The food, the wine, the empty words, they all blurred together. The man I once loved, the man I once trusted, was unraveling in front of me. But he didn't know it yet. I had already taken everything I needed. The documents were secure. My investments, my new life, everything was set. I was the one holding the hammer now. The weapon in my hands, heavier than any of the diamonds he had ever given me. I left that night, not with a bang, but with a whisper. A promise to myself that he would never own me again. The calls came, of course. His frantic messages, his lawyer's threats, the pressure to return. But it was too late. I had already moved on. Ashton spent the next weeks trying to patch up the mess I had made of his life. His partners were pulling out, his clients were fleeing, and his once perfect empire was falling apart at the seams. And I sat back and watched. When the FBI arrived at his door, when they finally came for him, I knew the game was over. But it wasn't just over for him. It was over for all the men like him, men who used their wealth and power to control, to break, to discard. I had walked away from everything: his empire, his name, his life, and yet I had never felt more powerful. And now, standing in front of the courthouse, ready to testify against him, I understood. I had become something else, something more. I was no longer just his wife. I was the one who had taken back my life, my name, my freedom, and that was just the beginning.